you can't register by showing them your updated driver's license. Why? Because Massachusetts is one of the 45 states where a driver's license does not prove citizenship. So yeah, you can use a passport if you have one, but remember, fewer than half of all Americans have a passport, and it costs $165 to get one, and it takes a month or two if everything is working on time. No passport and no birth certificate that matches your driver's license, well, Trump and the Republicans say you're just out of luck.
83%. That is the number of American voters across party lines who support requiring photo identification to cast a ballot in a federal election. Not 60%, not 70%, 83%. And yet Elizabeth Warren stood on the Senate floor and argued against it. Marsha Blackburn had one question for her and the entire chamber. If 83% of the country supports this, and 14 states currently allow you to walk up to a polling place, claim to be somebody, and vote without showing a single document, who exactly are you protecting? Stay with me until the end of this video because the answer to that question is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about why this debate keeps happening. Hit like and subscribe right now because this one goes places most people you'll not follow it.
Is trying to stop American citizens from voting. Why? Because he knows his agenda is unpopular and that Republicans can't win based on what he's doing. So he wants to rig the election by picking his own voters. And that is what the SAVE Act is all about. Don't let Trump and the Republicans in Congress fool you. They'll say things like, hey, you have to show an ID to vote. You should have to show an ID to vote, just like you have to do to buy a beer. But this is not an ordinary voter ID bill. Let's say you're a married woman who lives in Massachusetts, and let's say that when you got married, you took your husband's name. Well, when you go to the polls to vote, you can't register by showing them your updated driver's license. Why? Because Massachusetts is one of the 45 states where a driver's license does not prove citizenship. So yeah, you can use a passport if you have one, but remember, fewer than half of all Americans have a passport, and it costs $165 to get one, and it takes a month or two if everything is working on time. No passport and no birth certificate that matches your driver's license, well, Trump and the Republicans say you're just out of luck.
We are watching the Democrats come full display of their loyalty to illegal aliens that are in this country. I mean, they are on it. Give them a choice between protecting the rule of law and protecting U.S. citizens. They're going to choose somebody illegally in the country every single time. That is really a disappointment to me because the Save America Act is something that 83% of the voters in this country support. 83%. These are not my numbers. These are numbers from public polls. Anyone can go and look these up. Now, it is common sense that you are going to show a photo ID many times a day to prove that you are who you are. And it is common sense that everyone should show a photo ID when they go to the ballot box to cast that vote. Indeed, they should be a citizen and prove they're a citizen if they're going to register to vote, thereby protecting one person, one vote, protecting the integrity of our election system. This is a way that we help ensure that we preserve this system. You know, in Tennessee, where I reside, my state, my wonderful state, is ranked number one when it comes to election integrity. We make certain that our voter rolls are cleaned up. We make certain that voter ID is enforced. We have accurate registration lists and verification of citizenship. All common sense. If you're going to cast a ballot in our elections, be a citizen. Let's prove that you are the person showing up to cast that vote, and be respectful of the situation. You know, Mr. President, we have said, let's make it easier to vote and harder to cheat, so that we protect the integrity of the system, so that we eliminate fraud, and so we preserve confidence in our election results. Well, it is just nonsensical that our colleagues across the aisle oppose this. Can you imagine that? 83% of the American people say, you're right, let's show an ID, let's be a citizen if we're going to vote. But no, our Democrat colleagues oppose it. They want to make it easier for non-citizens to cast ballots. In fact, 14 states in this country, and by the way, these are overwhelmingly blue states, 14 states do not require any documentation whatsoever to go cast your vote. Can you imagine that? You just walk up, claim to be somebody, and you vote. You know, I think that you look at these issues and you realize that our friends across the aisle, Mr. President, they might have been picking the wrong fight. People want DHS funded. They want the Save America Act passed. They want the integrity of our elections to be protected.
83% is not a polling number that leaves room for a reasonable opposition argument. When you are on the wrong side of 83% of the American public on any policy question, you do not have a policy disagreement. You have a political calculation, and that calculation deserves to be examined honestly rather than accepted at face value. Elizabeth Warren's argument against the Save America Act rested on a specific scenario. A married woman in Massachusetts who has taken her husband's name, whose driver's license no longer matches her birth certificate, who does not have a passport, and who would therefore be unable to satisfy the citizenship verification requirement. It is a sympathetic construction. It is designed to put a human face on an abstract policy objection, and it deserves a direct response rather than dismissal. Here is the direct response. The scenario Warren described is a documentation gap that exists independently of the Save America Act. If a married woman's legal documents are inconsistent with each other, that is a problem that affects her ability to navigate dozens of systems that already require identification, from employment verification to financial accounts to professional licensing. The Save America Act did not create that gap. Addressing that gap through accessible and low-cost documentation assistance, which several states have already implemented, solves the problem Warren is describing without leaving 14 states in a condition where you can walk up to a polling location, state a name, and cast a ballot with zero verification attached to it. The passport argument is similarly constructed to sound decisive without actually being so. Yes, fewer than half of Americans hold a valid passport. Yes, they cost money and take time to obtain. But the Save America Act does not require a passport. It requires proof of citizenship. A birth certificate satisfies that requirement. A naturalization certificate satisfies that requirement. Several states have already moved to make their standard driver's license a compliant document by incorporating citizenship verification into the issuance process. The argument that citizenship cannot be proven without a passport is simply not accurate when you read what the legislation actually requires rather than what the opposition says it requires. Marsha Blackburn made a point that should have ended this debate, but will not, because the debate was never really about documentation. She pointed out that Tennessee is ranked #1 in the country for election integrity, clean voter rolls, verified registrations, enforced identification requirements, and the state continues to function. Citizens continue to vote. The apocalyptic scenario of mass disenfranchisement that opponents predict has not materialized in any state that has implemented rigorous verification standards. Not one. The evidence from states that have done this is the most powerful argument available, and it is almost never the centerpiece of this conversation. Now here's the structural reality that Blackburn also named and that deserves serious attention. 14 states currently require no documentation whatsoever to cast a vote. You present yourself, you state a name, you vote. There is no verification step between your claim and the ballot being cast. In a country of 330 million people, across thousands of polling locations, with millions of transactions happening on a single day, the idea that this system has zero exploitable vulnerability requires a level of institutional faith that the documented evidence does not support. James O'Keefe's investigations and Nick Shirley's fraud exposure work have both produced on-camera admissions of people describing exactly how gaps in verification systems are identified and used. These are not theoretical vulnerabilities, they are operational ones. And the reason they persist in blue-administered jurisdictions specifically is not because blue state administrators are uniquely incompetent. It is because closing those gaps is not in the political interest of the coalition that depends on the maximum number of ballots being cast with the minimum number of questions asked. That is a hard thing to say. It should be said carefully, and with the acknowledgement that not everyone opposing the Save America Act is operating from that calculation. Some people genuinely believe that any friction in the voting process is net harmful to democratic participation. That is a sincere position. It is also a position that, taken to its logical conclusion, argues against any verification standard at all. And a democracy with no verification standard is not a democracy. It is an honor system operating at national scale. Honor systems work when the participants share a commitment to the underlying principle being honored. The principle here is one person, one vote, one citizen, one ballot. That principle has a specific meaning. It means the outcome of an election reflects the authentic choices of the eligible electorate and nothing else. The moment you introduce unverified ballots into that system, you introduce uncertainty about whether the outcome reflects that principle or something else. And uncertainty about election outcomes is the most corrosive force available to any democratic system, because it does not just affect the election in question. It affects every election that follows and every institution that derives its authority from electoral legitimacy. Marsha Blackburn understands this. Her argument is not about making voting difficult. Her argument is about making voting meaningful. There is a significant difference between those two things, and the opposition to the Save America Act has spent considerable energy trying to collapse that difference in the public mind. The soft bigotry of low expectations is a phrase that has been applied in various contexts, but it fits here with particular precision. The argument that requiring citizenship verification disproportionately burdens certain communities carries within it the assumption that members of those communities are less capable of navigating a documentation process that millions of Americans complete every year for far less consequential purposes. That assumption is not compassionate, it is condescending, and it should be named as such by everyone regardless of political affiliation. Elizabeth Warren is a Harvard-educated attorney and former law professor. She understands the difference between a sympathetic anecdote and a policy argument. The married woman in Massachusetts scenario is the former dressed up as the latter. Marsha Blackburn answered it with 83% and 14 states. One is a constructed hypothetical. The other is documented reality. The Senate and the American people deserve to know the difference. My name is Brian. Leave your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation is one that needs more voices in it, not fewer. Hit like, subscribe, and make sure you are here for the next one because we are not done pulling on this thread by a long shot.